the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. A controversial figure returns to the Israeli government. What this rabbi did when he found $98,000 in cash, Orthodox fashions, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. He's back. Recently acquitted on charges of fraud and breach of trust, the former Foreign Minister of Israel, Avigdor Lieberman, is once again the Foreign Minister of Israel. Lieberman was out of office for just under a year, having resigned his post last December while facing a likely indictment, which soon came to pass. Lieberman had been leader of the far-right Israel Beitenu party before it merged last year with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. The merger kept Netanyahu in the prime ministership in this year's Israeli elections, but now that Lieberman is out of the prosecutorial shadows, his party and Netanyahu's Likud are reportedly likely to end their alliance. Depending on how and when that takes place, it could wreak havoc on the current government, which is held together by an alliance among Netanyahu and mostly center-left groups. And of course, the move comes just as the United States is hoping to ramp up Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, something that Lieberman and his partisans are sure to have an opinion about. Meantime, talks on another front continue regarding Iranian nuclear development. The U.S. and Iran seem to be on a course toward a deal that would allow Iran to retain some limited capacity for nuclear enrichment, ostensibly toward utilization in nuclear electrical power and for medical needs and other non-military applications. Netanyahu made clear his position on that approach in a speech to American Jewish leaders in Israel this week.
What is being proposed now is a deal in which Iran retains all of that capacity. Not one centrifuge is dismantled, not one. Iran gets to keep tons of low-enriched uranium.
At the same conference, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro emphasized the approach of the administration of President Barack Obama, saying, "There is no greater priority for the United States and Israel than preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. On this issue, the United States and Israel share an identical perspective. The president will not permit Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, period." But in the more euphemistic idea of going nuclear, the final acts of Brooklyn District Attorney Charles Joe Hines surprised many. Hines lost the Democratic primary to challenger Ken Thompson, largely over the issue of Hines' perceived failure to properly prosecute ultra-Orthodox crimes. Hines went on to campaign on the Republican and Conservative Party lines, but got only 28% of the vote to Thompson's 72%, and now Hines has lashed out. In the case of a man who many see as wrongly accused of witness tampering after he advocated on behalf of abuse victims, that of Sam Kellner, two prosecutors had told Kellner last Wednesday that the charges against him would be dropped. On Friday, Hines reversed that decision, demoted those two prosecutors, and said he'd move forward in prosecuting Kellner. Hines fired another prosecutor, Barbara Burke, who had blown the whistle on Hines and an associate for failing to provide records in a wrongful conviction case. In a case of an ultra-Orthodox rabbi making headlines for good reasons, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, returning lost objects, was news around the country this week, thanks to the actions of one rabbi in New Haven, Connecticut. When Rabbi Noah Muroff found $98,000 in cash in the desk he'd bought on Craigslist for only $150, he had an immediate response.
Right away, my wife and I sort of, looked at each other and we said, we can't keep this money.
The original owner of the desk told Muroff that she'd placed her life savings in the desk, but then couldn't find it later. As it turns out, the money had fallen behind a drawer, and it was only when taking the desk apart that Muroff found the cash. In a note of thanks to Muroff, the original desk owner wrote, "I do not think there are too many people in this world who would have done what you did. I will be forever grateful." But if you were an ultra-Orthodox rabbi with $98,000 of your own cash, you might find that some of that money would be spent on new clothes. In our next story, Meredith Gansman reports on one designer pitching fashions for precisely that crowd.
Ladies, you all know how difficult it is to wear a shirt or a sweater and stay tucked in every day. But I've got something for you that's better than a shirt without the challenges of a bodysuit. Meet the body shirt.
It's the product of Brandament, a new fashion collection from Jewish designer Tamar Daniel. I visited Daniel's showroom and talked to her about what went into the creation of the body shirt.
For me, the idea originated when I realized that it was really hard for women, especially working women, but everybody to stay tucked in during the day. So the idea of taking the practicality and the usefulness of the traditional bodysuit, but combining it with cooler fashion tops and wearable tops and fun tops, so that you don't feel like you have to choose between the practicality and the fashion element.
Daniel isn't the first designer to attempt that combo. In fact, the concept was pioneered by a big Jewish name in fashion.
Donna Karan in the late 80s famously was the first one to really make it a key wardrobe item. And it was one of her 7 easy pieces launching collection.
Daniel's improvements include making the body shirt more versatile.
Yeah, I wanted to cover several bases in terms of a woman's life and her primary points that she needs to hit during the day. And that also means that I cover several different types of women. So obviously the work environment, but also more social settings.
To learn more about Brandiment body shirts, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, what was the message that won re-election for President Barack Obama in 2012, and how did that message come about? That story is told in a new book by MSNBC.com executive editor Richard Wolff entitled The Message, The Reselling of President Obama. He stopped by TJC Studios to talk about it, and here are the highlights. This is your second book summarizing a campaign. You did one on the 2008 election of President Barack Obama. Now this is the 2012 re-election of President Barack Obama. What do you think are the most important lessons we can draw from the campaigns, given that this book is now out a year later and so forth?
You know, what's really interesting when you go back after a campaign, in spite of all the coverage, all of the news stories and all the attention and everything else poured into it, what's fascinating is that when you go back to the people right at the heart of it, the stories look and sound very, very different. When the pressure of trying to win is off them, because obviously in this case they won, the other side lost, but they're open about what worked and what didn't work. And you know, David Axelrod, who is the sort of brain behind the Obama campaign, both of them in fact, likes to say that when you're winning everyone thinks you're a genius, and when you're losing they think you're an idiot, and really neither is true. And the winners in this case, my focus here on the Obama campaign in 2012, everything you'd have picked up, you'd have thought these guys aced everything. Everything was perfect, everything worked smoothly, and what I found was a very, very different story.
But what do you think it says about the electorate and the message of the respective parties that in many ways, despite the economy and despite the situation regarding various legislation and despite foreign policy not being a blossoming of great things, that it still felt like it was Obama's election to lose?
You know, elections are a contrast, right? They're a choice between two sides. So if the other side is failing even more spectacularly than the other side, then, you know, what's your comparison? It's like saying, well, the Obama's team, maybe their technology wasn't perfect, but the Romney team's app crashed on election day. So what's the point of comparison here? So, you know, you can't blame the voters for saying, well, given a choice between okay and disaster, I'll take okay.
And there are a couple of elements that you bring to light in the book that I think is largely missing from the rest of the campaign narrative that's out there. And one of them is very much how the 2012 campaign for the re-election of President Barack Obama drew a lot of inspiration from the 2004 campaign for the re-election of President George W. Bush.
They did, and they will only admit that sort of behind the scenes, right? It's sort of poison for Democratic voters to feel that, you know, Barack Obama has drawn any point of comparison or copying from George W. Bush. But it is true. They understood very clearly they were on a very similar track in terms of the approval ratings. Running against the headwinds in Bush's case of Iraq, but in the president's case, in President Obama's case, the economy. And they were really looking to, for instance, define their opponent very early on, just as Bush did with Kerry. Of course, there were also parallels because Kerry and Romney were from Boston. They sort of represented similar figures,
they were
similar characters, problems about being out of touch associated with their wealth, problems about communication, like could they even connect with people? It's not just whether you have a similar experience as an individual, it's whether you can communicate that.
You can see the full interview with Richard Wolff in the interviews category under TJC Original Series on the Jewish Channel On Demand on cable. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.